There is something many people don't realize about secrets. When you tell a friend your problem, you usually believe two things. First, that they care about you. Second, that they want to help you. But sometimes the person listening to your problem is not trying to solve them. They are only trying to understand your life better than you do. And once someone understands your life that well, they can change it. Osinachi had always been the kind of woman people describe with one simple sentence. She has a free mind. Most people are naturally careful with their words, but Osinachi was not one of those people. If something made her happy, she shared it. If something upset her, she talked about it. And if something confused her, she believed the only way to deal with it was to discuss it openly with whoever happened to be nearby. It wasn't because she was careless, nah. It was simply because she had grown up like that. Her childhood had been comfortable enough. Her parents were not rich, but they were not struggling either. There was always rice in the pot, school fees were paid on time, and laughter filled the house most evenings. Whenever someone had a problem, the entire family seemed to gather to discuss about it. So, Osinachi grew up believing something very simple. Life becomes easier when you talk about your problem. When she married Francis, she carried that same belief into her new home without thinking twice. And for a while, life seemed to support that belief. Francis was a quiet man. He was calm. He was not unfriendly. Where Osinachi spoke quickly and emotionally, Francis spoke slowly and calculatively. He worked at a logistics company where his job involved supervising deliveries and managing transport schedules. The work was stressful, but he was good at it. He wasn't the type who liked unnecessary drama, and maybe that was why he liked Osinachi. She brought the energy into his life. Their marriage was peaceful most of the time. They lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment inside a compound with two facing buildings and 8 flats. It was a kind of compound where everybody recognized everybody's footsteps. If someone bought a new fridge, people knew. If someone argued with their spouse, the whole compound heard of it, at least the highlights. And if someone cooked stew with too much pepper, well, someone would definitely comment on it. Life there was loud, sometimes friendly, sometimes chaotic, and Osinachi loved it. Evenings were the best time in the compound. After work, doors opened, plastic chairs from different flats. Children ran around chasing footballs and shouting loud enough to make the entire street aware of their existence. Adults gathered near their doors to relax, and conversations began. One evening, Osinachi stepped outside carrying roasted corn wrapped in newspaper. She dropped into her usual plastic chair and stretched her legs. Within minutes, Mama Chika from the next flat walked past holding a small tray of pepper and onions. "Good evening, my sister," Mama Chika said. "Evening, oh," Osinachi replied. "Come and rest small." Mama Chika didn't even need convincing. Within seconds, she had pulled a chair closer. "My legs are paining me today," she said. "What happened?" Osinachi asked. "I followed my daughter to the market. That girl can price things for Africa." Osinachi burst out laughing. "You need to see the way my husband prices things to the market. He behaves like tomatoes are made of gold." Mama Chika laughed too. "What did Francis do again?" Osinachi shook her head dramatically. "My sister, that man is worrying too much these days." "About what?" Mama Chika asked. "Money," Osinachi said casually. "Work has been slow for him recently." At that moment, Amaka from the opposite flat stepped outside. "What are you discussing again?" she asked. Osinachi grinned. "Marriage conference." Amaka laughed and dragged a chair closer. Within minutes, the compound was filled with laughter. Stories moved from one topic to another, from husbands to children to work to food prices, and as usual, Osinachi spoke the most. To her, it was harmless, just neighbors talking and relaxing, that's all. But words have a strange nature. Once they leave your mouth, they begin a journey of their own. A few days later, Osinachi walked to the small provision shop at the end of the street. The shop belonged to Mama Nkechi, a woman known for two things. She could calculate change faster than a calculator, and she could remember almost every conversation she had ever heard. Osinachi leaned on the counter that day. "This heat is too wicked," she complained. Mama Nkechi laughed. "Take cold malt first before you faint." Osinachi smiled. "I really need this malt oh. In fact, marriage is not easy at all. Do you know what happened?" Mama Nkechi raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" "Nothing serious," Osinachi replied quickly. "It's just that Francis is just stressed because of work these days." Two women who were browsing from inside suddenly raised up their eyebrow. Osinachi didn't even notice them at all, and she continued talking. "He even said we should reduce spending these days." Nkechi nodded thoughtfully. That's bad though," Osinachi said. "My sister, what will I do?" She took her bread and walked home. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes, but those 3 minutes had many listeners, and listeners sometimes remember more than they should. That evening, Francis came home looking tired. Osinachi served him dinner. While they ate, she began telling a funny story about one of the neighbor's children who had hidden her report card. Francis smiled politely. Then he said something quietly. "Osinachi." "Yes," she replied. "Did you talk about our home outside?" She looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "I just think some things are better kept between us." Osinachi laughed slightly. "These people are our neighbors. They're like family." Francis sighed. Then he said something calmly. "Not everyone who laughs with you wishes you well." Osinachi waved her hands dismissively. "You worry too much." And just like that, the conversation ended. 2 weeks later, a new tenant moved into the compound. Her name was Ijoma. She arrived quietly on a Saturday afternoon with 2 suitcases. Unlike most new tenants who quickly try to join compound gossip, Ijoma behaved differently. She greeted politely, smiled often, but spoke very little. People assumed she was shy, but Osinachi liked her immediately because Ijoma had one special quality: she listened. One evening, Osinachi saw her sitting outside reading a small book. "You're always quiet," Osinachi said, sitting beside her. Ijoma smiled. "I enjoy listening." "Wow," Osinachi said. "Today you will hear something interesting." And she began talking about Francis' stressful job, about the landlord increasing rent, about their small savings reducing small small. Ijoma nodded occasionally. Sometimes she asked more questions because questions invite answers, and answers reveal more than people realize. Weeks later, Osinachi and Ijoma began talking more often, more like besties, sometimes in the corridor, sometimes while buying groceries, some evenings when everyone sat outside waiting for electricity to return. And slowly, Ijoma learned many things about Osinachi's life, about Francis, about their finances, about their small disagreements, about the things that worried her. Osinachi didn't even notice this at all. To her, she was simply talking to a friendly neighbor. But information has value, especially when someone is paying close attention. Then, one evening, something strange happened. Francis came home looking uncomfortable. He dropped his bag and sat down angrily. "Osinachi," he called out, "did you tell people I'm struggling at work?" Osinachi blinked. "What?" "A man at my office asked if I needed financial help," he continued. Osinachi frowned. "I never told anyone that." But suddenly, she remembered the conversation at the shop. Still, she brushed the thought aside. "Maybe it's just gossip. You know how people are," she said. Francis nodded slowly, but his expression remained troubled. A few days later, something else happened. Osinachi walked past two women in the compound. At first, they were talking and laughing. Immediately she approached, their voices dropped, but she still heard one sentence clearly from one of the women. That's the woman who said her husband can't handle money well. They immediately noticed Osinachi and suddenly smiled awkwardly. Good evening, my sister. Osinachi forced a smile. Evening. But as she walked away, a strange feeling settled in her stomach. Something felt wrong. Later that evening, she sat outside again. Ijoma joined her. You look worried, Ijoma said gently. Osinachi sighed. People in this compound talk too much. Ijoma smiled slightly. That's normal. I think someone is twisting my words, Osinachi continued. What do you mean? People are saying things about my husband, things I never said. Ijoma nodded slowly. Then she asked a quiet question. Do you tell many people about your problems? Osinachi laughed. My sister, if you keep problems inside your heart, will you not develop high blood pressure? Ijoma smiled again, but this time her smile lingered a little longer, and for a brief moment, her eyes seemed to study Osinachi very carefully. Osinachi leaned back in her chair and continued talking. She didn't notice that Ijoma had become unusually quiet. She didn't notice the thoughtful expression on her face, and she definitely didn't realize something important. Every conversation she had was slowly building a detailed picture of her life, a picture someone else understood, perhaps even better than she did. And sometimes, when someone understands your life that well, they don't need to attack you. They only need to move a few words in the right places and watch everything change. However, the next week passed quietly, too quietly. The compound continued its usual rhythm. Children running, women discussing food prices, men arguing about football and fuel prices. But something had shifted in a way Osinachi could not properly explain. People were still greeting her, still smiling, but sometimes when she approached a conversation, the voices lowered just a little. Not enough to look obvious, just enough to feel different. At first, she told herself she was imagining things. After all, compound like this thrive on gossip. Today it could be her, tomorrow it would be someone else. Still, the strange feeling refused to leave. One Tuesday evening, electricity went out again. Darkness spread across the compound like a blanket. Within minutes, generators began coughing from one end to another. But Francis did not start theirs. Instead, he stepped outside and sat on a plastic chair. Osinachi joined him with two plastic cups of warm zobo. You look tired again, she said. Francis shrugged. You just work, my dear. But there was something behind his voice, something heavier. She waited. Francis was not the type to talk immediately. When he had something on his mind, it usually came out slowly. And sure enough, after a few minutes, he spoke. Someone called me today, he said. Osinachi frowned. Who? A colleague of mine from another branch, she said. That sounds good, she said quickly. Maybe they want to offer you a more better position. Francis shook his head. He didn't call to offer me a position. Osinachi waited. Francis continued. He called to ask if I was planning to leave my current job because of financial pressure. Osinachi blinked. What? Yes. He said he heard I was having problems managing money. Silence settled between them. The noise of a distant generator filled the space. Osinachi felt the same cold feeling returning to her stomach. But that's not true, she said slowly. I know, Francis replied. But someone told him something. Osinachi's mouth opened slightly. For the first time, she began replaying recent conversations in her mind. The evening talks, the small complaint, the casual jokes, the things she had said without thinking. And suddenly, they didn't feel so harmless anymore. But still, she pushed the thoughts away. It must just be rumors, she said. Francis looked at her quietly. Then he nodded. But the silence that followed felt heavier than before. A few days later, something even stranger happened. Osinachi walked to Mama Nkechi's shop again. The small shop was busy as usual. Three women were arguing over the price of garri. A young boy stood outside drinking a bottle of soda. Mama Nkechi was behind the counter counting change. When she saw Osinachi, she smiled. My customer! Osinachi forced a small laugh. I came to buy milk. As Mama Nkechi reached for the shelf, she said something casually. Your husband must be very lucky, she said. Osinachi paused. What do you mean? Mama Nkechi smiled. A patient woman like you, managing the house even when money is tight. You must be a very good wife material. Osinachi's smile froze. Who told you money is tight? Mama Nkechi looked surprised. I thought you mentioned it the other day. Osinachi looked surprised. I never said that. The shop became strangely quiet for a moment. Mama Nkechi looked confused. Maybe I misunderstood. Osinachi nodded slowly. Maybe. She paid for the milk and left angrily. But as she walked home, the uncomfortable feeling in her chest grew stronger because she was beginning to notice something. The things people were repeating were always slightly different from what she actually said. Not completely false, but it had more pepper in the story. And those small adjustments were slowly changing how people saw her life. That evening, she found Ijoma sitting outside again. This time, she was not reading. She was simply watching the compound. Osinachi sat beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Osinachi said, I think someone is spreading stories about me. Ijoma tilted her head slightly. What kind of stories? That my husband cannot manage money, that we are struggling, she said. Are you struggling? Osinachi hesitated. Well, things are not perfect, but it's not like that. Ijoma nodded thoughtfully. Then she asked softly, who have you told about your worries? Osinachi laughed lightly. My sister, everyone complains about something. But who exactly? Ijoma asked. Osinachi began counting casually. I told Mama Chika. I also told Amaka and maybe Mama Nkechi when I went to buy bread. Then she paused for a while. And you also, I told you. Ijoma smiled gently. Ijoma smiled gently. That's normal, but something about the way she said it felt measured. Osinachi looked at her. You really don't talk much about your own life. Ijoma shrugged. I prefer to listen. Why? Ijoma looked at the compound children running across the sand. Then she said something quietly. Because when people talk long enough, they eventually over-explain themselves. Osinachi laughed. You sound like a teacher. But Ijoma didn't laugh. Her eyes remained calm and observant. Over the next few weeks, the strange situations continued. One neighbor joked loudly about budget marriages. Another neighbor asked Osinachi if she was planning to start selling food to support the house. Each comment was small, but together they were becoming something bigger. Francis began withdrawing more. He spoke less during dinner. Sometimes he sat quietly staring at his phone. One night, Ijoma finally asked him, are you angry with me? Francis sighed. I'm not angry. Then what is it? He hesitated before answering. It feels like our private life has become public entertainment. The words hit harder than she expected. I never meant that, she whispered. I know, but intentions doesn't stop consequences. Osinachi looked down at her hands. For the first time in her life, she began to understand something difficult. Talking about problem might bring temporary relief, but once those words leave your mouth, you can no longer control where it went. 3 days later, something happened that finally forced her to pay attention. It was Saturday afternoon. Most tenants were home. Children were playing football loudly. Two men argued about politics near the gate. Osinachi stepped outside carrying a bowl of beans to wash. As she passed Amaka's door, she heard something that made her stop. Amaka was talking to another woman inside. That's why I said the husband is struggling, the wife herself told me. Osinachi froze. Her heart began beating faster. The other woman asked, who told you? Amaka replied casually. Ijoma said Osinachi mentioned it to her many times. Silence filled Osinachi's ear. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. But then Amaka continued. She said the man might even lose his job soon. Osinachi's fingers tightened around the bowl. Suddenly, the small piece of confusion over the past weeks began connecting together. The adjusted stories, the strange comments, the information spreading further than expected, and right at the center of it, the quiet listener Ijoma was behind all this. Osinachi slowly stepped away from the door. Her heart was beating harder now, not from anger, but from realization, because she remembered something Ijoma had said days earlier. When people talk long enough, they eventually explain themselves. Osinachi had thought it was a harmless sentence. Now, it sounded different. And for the first time since Ijoma arrived in the compound, Osinachi began to wonder something she had never considered before. What has Ijoma been doing with all this she heard? Because listening is sometimes the most powerful position in any conversation. And somewhere in the compound at the exact moment, Ijoma was sitting quietly outside again, watching, observing, and waiting for the next conversation. However, the realization did not come with shouting. It came quietly. Later that evening, Osinachi sat inside her living room long after Francis had gone to bed. The ceiling fan rotated slowly above her, pushing warm air around the room. She was not angry, not yet. What she felt inside was something heavier, embarrassment, because for the first time she began to see her own life the way other people in the compound had probably been seeing it for weeks. A story she herself had been narrating, piece by piece, conversation by conversation, without realizing that someone else had been collecting the pieces, carefully, patiently, and rearranging them. She sat there replaying memories, every evening talk, every small complaint, every harmless joke about money or work. She had never lied about her life, but she had done something very dangerous. She had over-explained it. An explanation in the wrong hands can become weapons. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. Francis was still asleep. She stood in the kitchen, staring at the kettle while the water heated slowly. For a moment, she considered telling him everything she had just realized, but something stopped her. Not fear, just understanding. This was a lesson she needed to learn first and fix it quietly. That evening, as expected, the compound came alive again. People were outside, gisting and laughing. And like clockwork, Ijoma appeared outside with the same calm expression she always wore. She spotted Osinachi immediately. "You disappeared yesterday," Ijoma said lightly. Osinachi smiled politely. "I was tired." They sat down. For a moment, the conversation remained normal, about the electricity, weather, food prices, the usual harmless topics. Then Ijoma asked gently, "How is Francis now? Is he still stressed about work?" Osinachi looked at her for the first time since they met, and suddenly something became clear. Ijoma was not asking casually. She was waiting, waiting for the next piece, the next detail, the next window into someone else's life. But this time, nothing came. Osinachi simply shrugged. "He's fine." Ijoma looked confused. Then she tried again. "And the money issues?" Osinachi smiled calmly. "We are okay." That was so strange. Ijoma looked confused even more. Then she tilted her head slightly and said, "You used to talk more." Osinachi nodded. "Yes." The smile on her face remained gentle, but something about it had changed. "I used to." The conversation ended shortly after that. For the first time since moving into the compound, Ijoma had nothing new to take away. No fresh stories, no new detail, no additional puzzle piece, and slowly, very slowly, the stories about Osinachi began to fade because rumors survive on fuel. Without fresh information, even the most interesting gossip eventually dies. Weeks passed, the compound became to its usual balance. People find new topics, new gossip, new entertainment, and Francis noticed something too. One evening during the dinner, he looked at Osinachi and said, "You've been quiet lately." She smiled. Have I? He nodded. Yes. Osinachi did not explain the reason. She simply served more soup into his plate because some lessons are better practiced than discourse. Across the compound, Ijeoma continued living her quiet life, still polite, still observant. She was still listening, but one thing had changed. Osinachi had stopped providing material, and when someone stops giving you the map to their life, even the best listener eventually loses their way. Months later, during one evening gathering, Mama Chika said something jokingly. You don't tell us stories like before, Osinachi. What happened? Everyone laughed. Osinachi laughed too. Then she said something simple. Not every problem needs an audience. The group chuckled, thinking it was a joke. But Osinachi knew better because life had quietly taught her a truth many people discover too late. When you share your problems with people, you are not only looking for comfort, you're also revealing your weaknesses. And while some listeners truly care, others are simply studying the blueprint of your life, waiting for the right place to make small adjustments. That is why wisdom sometimes sounds like silence because peace often begins the moment you stop explaining your life to everyone who is willing to listen. And from that day forward, Osinachi still laughed, still greeted neighbors, still sat outside during cool evenings. But one thing changed forever. Her life remained hers, and her problem finally had fewer spectators. Thank you for watching this story. Kindly tell me your thoughts and lessons in the comment section. Do well to like and share with your loved ones. Don't forget, every life is a diary. See you in the next story.